Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi is one of those rare figures who cannot be explained through a single identity. He is known as Rumi, the Roman, because he lived in Anatolia, the land once called Rum. Yet he was born in Balkh, in today's Afghanistan. His family roots extend into the Persian and Turkic worlds, though the exact balance is still debated. He wrote in Persian, was embraced by Turkish culture, lived in Anatolia, and became a universal voice far beyond all of them. This is not a contradiction to be resolved, it's a synthesis already achieved. Rumi is at once East and West, Balkh and Rum, scholar and mystic, law and love. Before poetry, before ecstasy, before Sema, Rumi was a Sunni scholar. In Konya, he taught in madrasas, issued legal opinions, and represented religious authority. He belonged to the world of order, reason, and structure. This was not accidental. Rumi was born into a scholarly lineage. His father, Bahattin Veled, was himself a respected religious scholar and preacher, known as Sultanul Ulema. From an early age, Rumi was trained in the disciplines of Islamic learning, Quranic studies, hadith, law, and theology. His education was rigorous, classical, and continuous. After his father's death, Rumi inherited not only his position, but also his authority. Students gathered around him. He lectured, interpreted, and judged. He didn't stand at the margins of religious life. He stood at its very center. Then came Shams of Tabriz. The relationship between Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi and Shams of Tabriz cannot be fully defined by historical records, and perhaps that is precisely why it resists every simple label. Shams was a wandering dervish, but not an ordinary one. He rejected settled life, institutional authority, and spiritual hierarchies. He distrusted established knowledge, reputation, and recognition. By his own words, he was not seeking ordinary disciples, but a companion who could enjoy being burned. Rumi, before Shams, stood at the very center of what Shams resisted. He was a respected Sunni jurist, a legal scholar, a public authority, a man formed by learning and discipline. What Shams brought to Rumi was not new information. Shams didn't say, "There are things that don't you know." Instead, he revealed something far more unsettling. Your knowledge is protecting you, and therefore it must be burned. The bond between Rumi and Shams doesn't resemble a conventional teacher-student relationship. Shams didn't lead Rumi somewhere new. He pulled him out of where he already was. He didn't instruct, he unsettled, he provoked, he remained silent, and above all, he stayed intensely close. In Shams, Rumi encountered something his scholarly identity couldn't resolve: desire. Not intellectual curiosity, not admiration, but a rapture within the self. This question has echoed for centuries. Were Rumi and Shams in love? Historically, we know this much. Their bond was intense. They withdrew together into long periods of seclusion. Rumi spoke of Shams with extraordinary emotional force. Yet, this relationship cannot be proven as a romantic one in the modern sense. Still, one thing can be said with confidence. This was a love that escaped simple categories. Not easily sexual, not purely spiritual, not abstract, not disembodied. In Sufi language, it might be called spiritual love, but that doesn't weaken it. It intensifies it. For Rumi, Shams was a mirror, a wound, and a summons. Through Shams, Rumi didn't find a path to God. He found a place where his own self began to dissolve. And then Shams disappeared. When Shams disappeared, Rumi didn't immediately turn inwards. First, he suffered. For a long time, Rumi searched for Shams in the other worlds. He sent messengers, he followed rumors, he waited. Historical sources suggest that Rumi even traveled to Damascus, hoping to encounter Shams again. This was not symbolic searching, it was real loss. Rumi grieved, he wept, he mourned. The intensity of this absence reveals how deep the bond had been. Shams was not simply a guide who had moved on. He was a presence whose disappearance left a wound. Only later did something shift. Gradually, Rumi stopped searching for Shams outside himself, and it's at this point that poetry began to pour forth. In the Divan, his great collection of poems dedicated to Shams, Shams no longer appears as a body to be found, but as a voice that speaks from within. The loss didn't end the relationship, it transformed it. Shams became memory, echo, and inner fire. What couldn't be found in the world began to speak from inside the soul. It would be inaccurate to say that Shams taught Rumi. What Shams revealed was this: Rumi had been using knowledge as a form of protection. Learning had become a shield. Shams stripped it away. And after Shams, law gave way to longing. Discourse gave way to poetry. Teaching gave way to turning. This was not a smooth transformation. It was a collapse, but a fertile one. Shams didn't teach Rumi about God, what was already there. What Shams revealed was something more difficult. One cannot reach God without first losing the self. And so Rumi's path no longer moved through knowledge, but through love. Not by choosing between opposites, but by allowing them to turn together. What followed Shams was not silence, it was motion. Loss didn't bring Rumi to rest, it displaced him. Something couldn't longer settle, something could no longer arrive. The absence didn't ask to be resolved, it demanded to be lived with. And so movement remains, not as a journey toward destination, but as a way of staying open. What couldn't return began to circulate. What couldn't be held began to turn. Rumi didn't replace Shams. He didn't overcome the loss. He learned how to remain inside it without closing it. And this remaining took the form of turning. Turning was no longer a means to find what was lost. It became a way to stay faithful to it, not the possession, but the longing. The body began to speak what words could no longer contain. Movement replaced arrival. Circling replaced certainty. Rumi turned between absence and presence, memory and immediacy. The beloved who vanished and the beloved who remains. In this turning, the search was no longer something to complete. It became something to sustain. The Sema ceremony is often seen as aesthetic or symbolic, but for Rumi, turning is not representation. It is participation. Everything turns. The planets, the atoms, the blood in the body, the heart within the chest. Turning is how existence moves without fixing itself. When the dervish turns, he doesn't escape the world. He stays within its tensions, rights and lefts, earth and sky, self and other, reason and love. Turning keeps love in motion, it refuses closure. In Sema, one doesn't reach love, one remains oriented toward it. And through this sustained turning, the seeker approaches God not by arrival, but by fidelity to longing. Turning for Rumi is never natural. To turn is to burn, because every true movement requires friction, every circling generates heat, and every encounter with love consumes what can no longer remain intact. In Rumi's world, burning is not destruction, it is transformation. What burns doesn't disappear, it changes states. Just as raw matter becomes energy, the self becomes motion. Turning is the form this transformation takes in the body. It's energy in motion, desire kept alive, loss kept open, love prevented from solidifying into certainty. This is why turning never ends. Because synthesis, for Rumi, it's not a final harmony reached once and for all, it's a continuous state. Opposites don't cancel each other. They generate movements, law and love, reason and ecstasy, absence and presence remain in tension, and this tension keeps the soul alive. To turn is to remain inside this tension without escaping it, without resolving it prematurely. And this sustained movement is itself a journey, not a journey through space, but through being. Every turn redraws the self. Every turn burns away another fixed identity. Every turn brings the seeker closer, not to an image of God, but to a way of being oriented toward God itself. In Rumi, the path to God is not straight, it's circular. It doesn't end in arrival, it continues in devotion. To turn is to accept that the search doesn't conclude, because love doesn't conclude. And this, for Rumi, is not a failure to arrive. It's faith. Rumi's turning didn't end with his life, because what he revealed was not a personal experience, but a way of being. A way in which love is kept alive through moments, loss is transformed into devotion, and contradiction becomes a source of meaning. The true measure of this path is not found only in Rumi's words, but in what followed after him. In the next episode, we will look at how this way of turning became a living tradition, how it was carried into the world through the Mevlevi order, how it endured for centuries, how it shaped human lives far beyond its place of origin, and how this belief, born in a specific geography, crossed borders, cultures, and centuries, becoming a global phenomenon that continues to move, transform, and draw people inwards. Because a path that still turns has not ended. It's still calling.